Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this new episode of Barcelona BHHSeries. So today it's the number 10. We're going to talk about clinical trials today. So we think it's a very relevant topic to talk about at the moment, knowing that many or a lot of scientists across the world are actually busy looking for treatment for COVID-19 or like a vaccine as well. So we would like to discuss in that session the state of research in clinical trials across the world, and also a bit what has been learned those past weeks from the experience of COVID-19, and talk more particularly about new technologies and if they can actually help for clinical trials, so different aspects of clinical trials. To discuss that topic today, I've got the pleasure to be accompanied with experts in the field. So first we have Dr. Xavier Cañas, who is the Director of Promotion and Development of Clinical Research at the VIR, so Vall Institute of Research in Barcelona. Then we have Dr. Grahaem Brown, who is partner at CDDI, Moreu, the CEO of MedSir, and Javier, the CEO of Iomed. So I will ask everybody to present themselves. So 5 minutes to tell us what you do, what your company is about, and your role a bit in clinical trials. So we're going to start with Xavier, please. Welcome.
Hello. I don't know if,
Yeah.
Hello, Aline. Thanks to invite me to join this Barcelona Health Hub seminars. And it's my pleasure to join you and to share what we have been doing the last couple of weeks and months. And good afternoon to the audience from Barcelona, always sunny and quiet, and once more healthy. And I'm working in the hospital, in the University Hospital of Barcelona, as you will see in the next slide. And those of you that are not aware of the hospital, it's a large hospital here in Catalonia, one of the largest in Spain. In fact, there is a campus up to 22 different buildings, 4 hospitals, 2 institutes of research, dealing with more than 1 million patients every year, with more than 2,000 researchers, over 9,000 people working in, and more than 45,000 people coming in and out every day. We are dealing with a huge number of clinical trials that we will talk today, over 1,300, and half of this huge number are dealing with early phases that we will be talking later on what means and what are related with. So I said the clinical trials, but many of you maybe are not so familiar with clinical trials meaning, that we will try to explain in the next slide. That first, what is a clinical trial? Nowadays is the best way that we have to test the new methods for diagnostics, for treatments and therapeutics, and therefore prevent illness and health conditions. In conclusion, the goal of this test is to determine whether or not something is both safe and effective dealing with some illness. And many times we listen about the phases in a clinical trial, phase 1, phase 2, but we are not aware of what means. I try to depict in a easy way to understand. There are 3 main phases, and after reaching the market, there is another phase. But one by one, the phase 1, we try to elucidate if the treatment is safe or not. Out of the effectiveness, we are more worried about the potential toxicity of the treatment, and we want to check the maximum tolerated dose and try to accommodate the different dosage levels to the human patients or healthy voluntary in order to prevent the appearing of side effects. Usually we carry out this phase 1 in a tens of patients, 20, 30, 40. If usually about 1/3, 33% of the trials goes ahead to the phase 2, that we will try to wonder if the treatment does work or not, if it is effective. We will work with a few doses that has been checked in the phase before. We will give this treatment to hundreds of patients, in between 200 and 800. And the main worry will be if we are able to draw the best dose to get the good solutions for this illness, for this pathology. Usually, 40% more or less of this of the treatments of the new sites goes ahead to the phase 3. That is the larger. And in this phase, we will be working with 1,000 of patients all around worldwide, with 2, 3, 4, 5,000 of patients. And the question in this phase will be if this treatment is better than the existing ones. So we will compare to the existing one or placebo if we have not previous treatment, such is the case of the COVID one. If all of these phases are okay, we will go to the market, and during years we will perform the call it phase 4, that we want to know what else it is important to know about this drug. Sorry, if we go ahead in the next slide, this is the clinical trials in order to know where we are working in Vall campus. The first in the bottom, no, sorry, in the top left, this is our ethics and philosophy. The patient is in the middle. So for the patient, trials are the best way to get access to a non-existing treatment or a non-available treatment in the national health system. For the professional, it's a way to learn, to improve, to evolve. For the medical department, it's a way to attract talent. The best graduate students of medicine, the best professional all around the world want to join and to share knowledge with the frontier research medical departments. For the hospital, it's a way to get and to improve visibility and positioning and make good agreements and to get involved in good projects in research. And for the national health system, it's the best way to have to show a competitive healthcare system, and to even to save money, because all the treatments, all the proofs, all the diagnostics that are being carried out in the clinical trials are paid by the sponsors that are pushing these clinical trials. So we can make a kind of merge public-private systems in order to get better results, better solutions. Left bottom, we have the trials we closed last year. We were involved in more than 1,300 ongoing trials, and we're in over 300 were new ones. In the research area we are working, more than in the right top, more than 60% is dealing with oncology and hematology in adults, and the other one is pediatric oncology, vascular and metabolic, neuroscience, infectious disease, digestive and liver disease, immunomediated disease and advanced therapies, research in surgery, obstetrics, pediatrics, and genetics, and a few others. And we cannot forget, for our hospital, for our institute, in the bottom right, that this activity also suppose and means an income to be injected directly in the research system. Last year we got more than 21 million euros to get in the research groups, in the research projects. And after going fast overview, which kind of trials are we involved in? The next slide, we can see different trials dealing with pancreas cancer, dealing with Huntington, dealing with amyloidosis, a rare disease, with trying to synthesize a vaccine for glioblastoma, a real lethal brain cancer, stem cells for spine injuries. In the right, you can see a race pilot that is developing. He got an spinal injury, and he's helping us to develop a smart cushioning for avoid pain in the skin when staying too many hours sitting in the car, for instance. In the left, you can see pioneer treatment for hyperattention and attention deficit disease with classes with virtual reality that we are performing in our psychology and psychiatry department. So this is just a small sample. Lastly, of course, we have been involved mainly in COVID trials, both in diagnostic, in therapeutics, and also in vaccines. And I hope with this fast overview, we can go deep inside later on in the discussion. Aline.
Thank you very much, Javier. That was really great, and a introduction for everybody on what are clinical trials. And I think that was important and necessary also for the discussion. Now we're going to ask Grahaem, the partner at CDDI, to tell us more about what they're doing. Grahaem, I think you muted. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Grahaem Brown. I'm an internist by training, so I spent 12 years doing clinical internal medicine before I joined the pharmaceutical industry. And then I've worked in a lot of big companies working on many different projects. So CDDI is a small consultancy. We're based in London and Barcelona. And what we do mainly at the moment is something that sounds rather complicated called evidence-based protocol feasibility. That means Xavier's have over 1,000 studies that are going on in Vall. Actually, I can't see my slides. Can you show the slides or not? Ah, okay, there we are. Yeah. So we're talking about evidence-based feasibility. And this is what this is how easy or difficult is it to run each clinical protocol? You know, how complicated is it to find patients? How complicated is it to do the protocol? There are many things involved in that. And recently we've been looking downstream from the protocol feasibility itself to selecting the best sites to do the clinical trial at, and then having selected the right sites to support the clinicians in actually finding the patients in that site. If you go on to the next slide, please. It just talks here about some of the factors which have got a big impact on recruiting patients to a clinical trial. And if we put on one side COVID for the moment, some of the other things that are very important is, first of all, the characteristics of the new study drug. How important is it? Is it a life-saving drug? Is it a small improvement on an existing drug? Those sorts of things. The next thing is how complicated it is to run the protocol. And if protocols were as simple as Xavier's slide showing phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, this would all be a nice and easy thing. But actually protocols are very complicated. and quite likely to be about this thick at the end of the day, by the time everything is put into it. Then the next thing is selecting the right sites. And history tells us that for any given clinical trial, about a third of the sites that say that they're going to participate actually never recruit a single patient. And that's obviously not a very good way to go about things. The next thing is, having found a good site, do the people know how to find the patients? Because they don't necessarily all walk up and bang on the door and say, I would like to be in a clinical trial. So finding them and working out how to recruit them to studies is an important issue. And then things that tend to get forgotten a little bit is relationships between the stakeholders. So there will be the person that's written the protocol, the company that owns the drug itself. They may or may not be working directly with the investigators, or they may be working with a clinical research organization. So how all these people work together is also very important in how successful the study is. And then last, of course, the financial considerations that Xavier talked about. And if you have two studies which are relatively equal interest to people, then naturally enough, people will tend to join the study which gives them more money. Sad but true. So on to the next slide then, please. So what about protocol feasibility then? That part of it, the feasibility of the protocol itself. And a protocol is critical to the success of a clinical study. If it's badly written, if it's very complicated, if it's unclear, if it isn't easy to follow, it will not be very successful in recruiting patients. It needs to be attractive, not only to investigators, but to patients themselves. And things like as few visits as necessary, as few investigations as necessary, and as few exclusions as possible. And that brings me on to one of the next topics, which is that every protocol has written into it a large number of inclusion and exclusion criteria. So an inclusion criteria will be a thing like, what is the disease we're talking about? Type 2 diabetes. Well, within type 2 diabetes, for example, there are many other criteria. What is the blood sugar, for example? Things like the age and the gender of the patient. What other diseases they have? What other treatments they're on? So this ends up with a large number of inclusions and exclusions. And if we go on to the next slide, you will see the end result of one of the things that we do, which is to analyze a draft protocol. So you see on the left-hand side, a protocol that was still being drafted, so this is not yet finalized, and you see blurred out about 20 or 30 inclusion-exclusion criteria. And it's shown as a filter because we have a certain number of patients going in the top. Let's say it's 100 patients with type 2 diabetes, and you see as they're filtered out by all the exclusion criteria, you see a very small number coming out of the bottom. So once we've analyzed that, we talk with the people who are designing the study and say to them, well, if you were to change this or that, if you were to change the upper age limit of the protocol from 75 to 80, how many more patients would you get? If you change the blood sugar, how many more patients would you get? If you allowed patients taking extra drugs, how many more patients would you get? Now, you can't change all of those things just to find more patients, obviously, but you can often change some things. And you see on the right the result of the exercise, that when some of those criteria were amended, you see a lot more patients coming out of the bottom of the protocol. So this is simplistically what we do. And at the moment, if you go on to the next slide, at the moment we do this in what you might call a rather retro process. So what you're seeing here is an electronic data capture screen. And what we do is we go to the investigator or the study coordinator, we ask them to find a sample of the patients, and we ask them to enter data from the last visit into the EDC. So this is simulating what would happen if that patient had been screened for a study when they were last seen. So this means basically taking the data out of the current clinical records. It's a manual process at the moment, putting it into another electronic record, and then analyzing it in the way that I've just shown. So that's obviously pretty old-fashioned these days. And I'm excited to hear what Javier is going to tell us about his magic new way of finding patients by searching electronic health records digitally, because that's obviously going to be the way of the future. If you go on to my last slide then, just a few glimpses of the future. First of all, electronic health records themselves. When they were first set up, they were set up to keep the record of a single patient. So if you know the name of the patient, or you know the hospital number, you can find a lot of information about that individual patient. If you want to find every patient in the hospital who's got type 2 diabetes with a certain set of characteristics, many of these record systems are not set up to search like that, which is where Javier's process will come in. So having extra what I'll call search engines, I'm sure there's a cleverer title than that, but having a search engine which can go into the electronic health record system and find all the different elements of the protocol. That means an X-ray, an ECG, pathology, clinical data. There are many different types of data that have to be found. And if they're all in one electronic health record, that's a big start. And then people, of course, have been talking about big data forever. And at last, it's beginning to come along. I've given you a couple of examples from the UK where there's a huge amount of activity at the moment around clinical trials for COVID. So we have a national health system which can actually do feasibilities using all data in the national health system, which is quite ambitious. I haven't tried it yet, so I don't know how well it works, but that's a good start. And then my last point, which I've actually stolen from the title of somebody else's meeting next week, which is remember that digital trials are still human trials. So the human element, the process, involvement of the investigators is absolutely critical. Having a cunning, clever electronic tool is useful, but it is not necessarily the end of the process. So the human element is still very, very important. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Grahaem. So now we're going to listen to Angel from the CEO of MedSir, who will tell us more on what they're doing at MedSir.
Thank you, Aline. Thank you for inviting MedSir to this event today. So I just joined MedSir just 1 week before we were all addressing to Spain this new way of living. So I'm very happy to be part of the MedSir story. And my background is coming from the technology side. So I've been in IBM for several years. So that means, and that puts some light on what Grahaem has telling and what I'm sure Javier will give us some of the hints of where the clinical trials are today and are going to become in the next near future. And I have to say that artificial intelligence, big data, and as well the human part of the clinical trials all combined have to make a big difference. And thanks to the current COVID situation that we are addressing, this has put in front of us an amazing opportunity. And I have to say, and speed on the digital transformation that we all need to address in all different aspects of our lives. So for that, I'm really, really enjoying my new role as the CEO at MedSir and bringing my technology background to this company. So what is MedSir? Well, I think it's very well summarized in the sentence that describes what the company is all about. It's bringing your idea, to life. So if we can depict that into more details, if you can see the next slide, the company has an ambition that is to transform the clinical research. And why we want to do that? Well, first of all, because we think research, the ideas are related to humans, and the humans are all based in all places around the globe. So we have seen that with COVID. So there are immense, tremendous amount of scientific power that we need to make sure that arrives to life. that this scientific knowledge becomes a reality. So that's the ambition of the company, is to transform the way we've been doing clinical research in the past. And that sounds very nice, but we have landed this in the last 8 years, where MedSir was born in 2012. Why we are trying to do that? Because we think, as I mentioned, that we have scientific experts in all over the place. We think that clinical trials have not to be isolated to a given hospital, although working with Xavier Brown, as we've been working in a lot of the clinical trials, is always a luxury thing to do, because they are all focused and they are excellent in scientific power and as well in the process. But of course, we want to transform the way we do it. First of all, because we think the knowledge is all over the place, but the patients are in every corner of the world. And we are working in scientific, in how we reinvent clinical trials in oncology. And it's a pity, but oncology is so spread that is one of the illnesses that we all want to stop, and we want to become a non-known illness. But this is I would say, a nice dream to have, correct? So why we want to transform clinical research? Because the knowledge is spread, the patients is all over the place, and as Javier have mentioned, Xavier, we want to ensure that the patients are empowered to really become part of the clinical trials, so that they have access to all the different clinical trials that they need to have for their situation. So how we do that? Okay, we connect the knowledge, the scientific knowledge, the researchers, with the companies that have the possibility to fund, to sponsor, well, to put the money to do the clinical trials. MedSir is sponsoring the end-to-end. So we bring the idea and then we make the idea a reality. And how we do that? We have analyzed how the clinical trials process has been done, and we put every single sign of improvement, of efficiency into the process. That means we are digitalizing everything that can be done, and that's why we have some already ongoing work with Iomed, with Javier, that he will go through that. But also we try to make more efficient the process. So end-to-end, transversal, so that we cover all the different places in the world. That's what we've been working in a multiple areas. So, and in a multiple countries, and with multiple researchers. We don't care where the research is coming from. We don't care where the idea is coming from. We don't care where the patient is. We want to make that universal. And for making that universal in a very well-known regulatory environment is not easy. So it's trying to ensure that we have top quality scientific content, that we do the protocols as the best as we can do it, and then that we sure that the feasibility, as Grahaem was saying, allows us to recruit and to recruit patients in a speedy way, so that the clinical trials become, instead of years investment, becoming months or days. That's kind of a dream, because not everything can be changed. And as Javier mentioned, it's different to do phase 1 than phase 2, phase 3, or phase 4. But the idea is, as I mentioned before, to ensure that any idea, wherever the idea is coming, have enough scientific content that can be merged with the technology that will allow that idea to bring life to the patients that needs the life to have. So with that, I would like to mention just our summary of where we've been today. And the next slide, please. So this is kind of our numbers. You can read over it, but I just like to mention that in 8 years of the company, we have proven that our model of doing clinical trials in a different manner is working, because otherwise an independent company will not be surviving nowadays. But what we are working right now is in chapter 2, in putting all the digital capabilities, the artificial intelligence and the analytics and the data into our process as well, to enhance and to really speed up. So with that, I will end with the next slide. That's how are we doing that? Well, we have presence in 2 countries with 3 offices, and we've been working with more than 388 sites. It's more than 300 ideas, the ones that we were working through. And we have already concluded more than 30 trials over the last years. And for this first time this year, we have proven the work process and the way we are working as an independent company is working. We are going to present this weekend the results of 2 major clinical trials in ASCO. And for us, that we are a very small company of 45 employees, split in these 2 big offices in Spain and in New Jersey, that we have proven that this is working, is real, but also we cannot keep stopping on what we are doing so far. So we need to improve and start using all the digitalization that's available today to speed up and do what we are doing in a very speedy process, compliance to all the regulation, ensuring that we have the best and the highest level of scientific content into the trials, but that using as well all the artificial intelligence, the data, and the capabilities that are available today. With that, thank you again, and I'm ready for the next chart for Javier, that will explain us how the digital world is going to help us and to improve in our ambition that is still there, and we expect to continually fighting for that.
Thank you very much, Angel. Yeah, so now we're going to listen to Javi, so the CEO of Iomed, so a very successful startup from Barcelona, who will tell us more what they're doing and how they apply their technology to clinical trials. Javi?
Yes, hello, good afternoon. It is really a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for inviting us. It is actually a pleasure also to share the stage with these awesome colleagues and friends, and we are already working together with many of you. So it's really a pleasure to be among you guys here today. So yeah, I will definitely try to address the different aspects that you guys mentioned about us in your interventions. Let's first start with a very brief introduction about what Iomed actually is for someone who has never actually heard about the company. So we are a company, a small company born in Barcelona and placed in the amazing Barcelona Health Hub in Hospital Sant Pau. And we are focused on applying a very particular version of artificial intelligence to a very precise step of the clinical trials, which is particularly patient recruitment. If we can move to the first slide, please. Yes, so what's the reason why we're focusing on patient recruitment? Actually, patient recruitment is the activity that Grahaem also already mentioned. It's a very difficult to perform activity in which we have to select a very particular sample of people that is going to participate in our clinical trials. This activity is taking nowadays simply too much time of our clinical trials. It's taking roughly 30% of the time, according to different statistics that we've been checking. And this is simply too much. It disincentivizes the efforts that sponsors, sites, and investigators are doing in this chapter of clinical trials, and it simply burdens too much the effort of research in this particular chapter. So our activity basically consists in massively speeding up this process by using a very particular methodology that I'd like to explain to you very briefly. If we can please move to the next slide. Basically what we do is reusing existing information that is already present in sites, in hospitals, to find those patients in a very fast and efficient way. What we do first, or what we need to do first, is to structure the information that we find in medical records. So nowadays, as most of you know, hospitals store a huge amount of information in medical records about a massive amount of patients. But that information is not really presented or not really stored in a directly reusable format. It's stored mostly in a text format. So basically we have a lot of information, but we have very little data. So we don't have the data, the variables to find those patients. So the very first step is to transform all that information into properly structured data. So what we do here is we apply our technology based on natural language processing. I will go through what exactly natural language processing is, but basically this technology allows us to produce a structured database, a codified database that enables us to automatically select patients, both for clinical trials and for other kinds of studies as well. It allows us to essentially browse the population of patients that we have in a hospital, obviously protecting their anonymization and their privacy, to find those patients that are more suitable for a particular clinical trial and inform the hospitals about the amount of patients they can actually recruit for that particular clinical trial, in a way that we help them boost both the speed and the amount of patients recruited for that particular clinical trial. Very briefly about our technology, I mentioned it was natural language processing. Natural language processing is a procedure within the world, very vast and rather ambiguous world of artificial intelligence. Natural language processing is a particular application of this that enables us to read through written texts, both in all of them in a digital format. In our particular case, of course, we apply this to electronic health records. So we have a very specific NLP technology based on a medical language that enables us to understand what is written within the medical record. So we can move to the next slide, please. So once we have a structured database already within the hospitals, we have come up with a very intuitive and simple way for us to browse the patient that we need to find. It is basically an interface, a very user-friendly interface, in which we can essentially filter the different patient types that we need. So filter by the disease, the symptoms, the treatments, the duration of their stays in the hospital, whatever information is contained in medical records. So essentially we can browse by anything contained in that medical record. And using this interface, we can then just shoot the different queries in a form of questions to the database, and we become a result back in form of how many patients, what patients actually can be recruited for that clinical trial. So moving on to the next slide, this of course enables us to bring on massive results to the table, because essentially we're replacing a very, very manual way of doing things by a fully automated way of doing it. And therefore we can see here a couple of results from a real use case, in which, as you can see, we can basically triple the amount of patients we find for a clinical trial, as said, clinical trial or clinical study in general. In this particular example, you can see that we screened almost 300,000 patients. So imagine if we should do that manually, that would simply be impossible. We screened almost 300,000 patients, and we did all that in a tenth of the time if we compare it to currently existing methodologies for patient recruitment. So altogether, we are making a very tedious manual way automatic, and therefore bring onto the table more patients faster, and with a very, let's say, data-focused approach. And if we're going to move on to the last slide, please. Yeah, that's actually the last slide. All that, of course, I would like to mention that it's a very important point. We, in any case, keep data protection in our core of our activity. It's basically within the core of both of our product design as well as our business development strategies. So patient data protection, as we can discuss now within the debate, it's absolutely a core priority and preoccupation of the team. So yeah, thanks for this little time for introduction, and yeah, Aline, all yours for the debate.
That was great. Thank you very much, Javier, and everybody for the presentation. It was very insightful on what clinical trials are. So we remind you that you have the chat available. So if you want to make questions for the experts today, we're going to pick the question in the chat and ask them in the time that's left today. So let's go a bit in the discussion now. So I would like to start talking about sponsors. So sponsors would define as pharma company or in CIOs, those type of profile. So, and I have a question for you, Javier. So you, as a site, as a hospital, how do you seduce those sponsors to choose you, to work with you?
Aline, usually the best way to become attractive is because the quality of your work. I mean, of course, you need to be, in our case, a large hospital with a large universe of patients in different specialties and different pathologies, with high talented clinicians and teams. But if you are not able to produce and to yield outcomes in such a way that rigor, quality, audits can be done regularly without major findings, you are out. I mean, the main attractiveness that we can work is quickness in the responses, reliability in these responses, dealing with a feasibility process that for sure Grahaem and Angel will talk, but the quality of the work. I mean, the rigor and the strength of the quality work we are able to carry out in the trials.
Okay, Angel, yeah, do you want to add something? You muted? No.
No.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? I'm okay. Okay, good.
Yeah.
As a sponsor, I have to say, and I agree 100% with Xavier, 100%. I think there's one thing that Grahaem mentioned as well. There's the human touch. What we have seen a lot of times is that you have sites of in tremendous quality where everything goes fine, but this eye-to-eye contact with the clinician or with the researcher that has this one that's empowered to decide if this patient goes or not goes to your clinical trial is very relevant. So I think this human touch that these days where we have been also, because we are in oncology, correct? So we've been always keep on going, working. Of course, when we had the collapse, we stopped a lot of activities, but Vall Brown were the first ones calling us, hey guys, we are ready. Okay, let's work differently. Let's do video conference. Let's ensure that we send the dose to the patient, or and then we were partners. I mean, I don't care. I pay it. You pay it. The results. How can we get it quicker? Who can help us? Do you have somebody else? Can we change the way we are working? And also, for example, the protocol of our teams going to their center were done jointly. So I think this human touch of working together, knowing where we are going, I think it's also a very, very relevant point, at least for us, because we are small, we sponsor very selected clinical trials, and then we need to be successful. We need to run it fast with all the quality, ensuring that we can follow all the audits, that we follow the regulator abilities, and that we end to the results that we aim at the beginning of the design of the clinical trial. So I think this the relationship, and then eye to eye, it's been very good. With Copernico, that's the clinical trial that we have not been able to launch it in Vall Brown, but we are launching it in different hospitals in Spain, as well as now opening in the US. We have decided to do something different because we are working not with oncologists, with other doctors. Like, they don't understand why we want to use immunotherapy to try to make a little bit better the standard of care in COVID, correct? So, and this is something that we are in this clinical trial right now working on. It's called Copernico. So in that case, we got help from a lot of our contacts, human persons with names that says, talk with this guy, talk with that guy, go to this hospital. And this has been speeding us. So we use the fast tracks that have been available at the public sector, okay, at the Agencia Española, and it's been amazing, the fast track. But also we need to do fast tracks because we were out of our of comfort zone. We're not working with the research in oncology. We were working with different parties. And then these hospitals, where they work as one unified team, and they allow us to be part of the team, then it's been making a big difference, I have to say.
Fantastic. Grahaem, maybe do you want to add something to that?
Well, yes, there's a very pragmatic side to all this, which is how efficient an institution is at processing things. You know, getting a clinical trial started is quite a complicated business. You have the ethics committee approval process, you have the national regulatory process, but then you also have a contract process at the hospital. And it's very important to people trying to set up a study that these things function smoothly. That's partly process, but again, it comes back to the human element. You know, a lot of this actually doesn't take very long if you do it today. If you wait till next week or next month, then it takes a long time. So having a smooth operation, just straightforward, it's almost like a factory, you know, making the thing run smoothly is one of the important aspects, because it may be that you can get the whole studies finished before some of the sites have even got started. And that's particularly an issue in the States, actually. It's not quite so much of an issue in Europe, but an issue in the States is often the contract that is the final thing. And you can have a really high quality academic site that you want in the study. But if the machinery to get the contract signed off and all the lawyers involved doesn't work, you know, somebody else will have finished the study before you ever get started.
Okay, thank you very much, Grahaem. So now I'd like to talk a bit about patients. So you mentioned patient a lot during your different presentations. And I would like to ask you what can be done today to include more patients in clinical trials, especially those patients who are not necessarily normally included in clinical trials. And maybe an example is if you take women health drugs, for instance, like drug for women. The drug those past years, most of them have been trialed like on men, and that's why they're not so efficient on women today. That's an issue. So what can we do today, like using technology or not, to include more women and more people who don't have access to clinical trials normally, but that would expand the scope and efficacy of drugs? Javier, do you want to start with that?
Sorry?
No, Javier, do you want to start? Iomed?
Oh, yeah, it's kind of complicated with Xavier and Javier, so it's trying to figure out who is who. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there is obviously an issue with the amount of or the variety of patients we can include in a clinical trial. From the purely technological point of view, obviously there is. This is more, I would say, a matter of the design of the research itself. From our more purely digital point of view, there is little we can do, as we are at the end of the day. We basically implement the constraints, limitations that we get from the sponsors and from the CROs we work with in different trials. So, I mean, from our perspective, what we need to see in the future is a more wide scope, or a wider scope in the design of the different trials and the design of the different inclusion/exclusion criteria for the populations.
Angel, can you unmute yourself? No.
Is that okay now? Okay,
yes,
good.
yes.
I think there's one area that's very relevant, the technology. So we are working on making accessible to the patients platforms where that have reliable information, so that they can be informed, but they also have warranties that the information that's there have the right technical and scientific content, and allowing that information to be accessible in an easy way, or to be digested by the patient or the context the context, no, the people that are taking care of the given patient, and that's what we are doing. For example, in Convive con el Cáncer, that's a platform, and I have to say that right now, with everything that we have been going through the COVID, it's been getting people that were not having easy way to access technology. They know right now how to access technology, and in every single age. So the digitalization of the population have increased in 3 months tremendously. So that gives us an opportunity that platforms that are reliable platforms that are being done jointly with people like MedSir, but in conjunction with other sites and with scientific power and with all the ecosystem that are related to oncology in that case, are things that are accessible. And I think that will help us to the patients to access in an easier way to the clinical trial that maybe they have not been able to access. So that means to speed up the ecosystem that are around a given clinical trial. So we have technology that allows to put the platform in place, but we need the content that have to be given in such a way that the patient can be consumed that. And on that sense, what we really need behind that is that the regulatory agents also transform themselves, because a lot of the transformation we are pushing from the private arena, but also collaborations, public-private collaborations are the ones that are also, I would say, screaming out, guys, we need to change. And we have seen that when there's been an emergency, a global emergency like this one that we're facing, the regulatory environment have been giving us some reason back to act. So we want them to act as well.
Exactly. And Xavier, you from the hospital, from the research center, have you implemented also some technologies or ways to include more patients in your trials?
Yep. Yes, we did in the past. We are indeed working with Iomed, successfully working with Iomed, and we start trying to figure out how could we improve our recruitment systems in order to go from this manual way that Javier was talking before, that is time consuming and even resources consuming for patients and for partners. We don't used to talk about the sponsors for the same reason that Angel said before. We prefer talking as partners. So time consuming, resources consuming, and we start moving, checking out different technologies, and this represented by Javier with Iomed is for us not the future but the present, because we are already using it. I mean, it's conceptually it's really easy. For sure, Javier will say that it's not as easier that I'm speaking, but the system, the application, the software is reading our electronic health records, tracking the inclusion and exclusion criteria. That I agree with Grahaem that we have to work a little bit more, trying to deal with inclusion it's bringing more added value, or which inclusion or exclusion factor is delaying the recruitment system, the recruitment process. So the application software is reading the electronic health records and screening through all the data that is contained in the HIR, and the same task that before it spans days, weeks, months, depending the daily workload of the teams. Now has become minutes, just minutes, in order to have a narrow or rather, depending what you want, list an amount of potentially recruitable patients matching with 100%, 90, 80% of the inclusion or exclusion criteria. I mean, this is fantastic.
It is exactly.
It's one of the strategies, yes.
Absolutely. Okay, so I will take a question from the audience. So we've got Nana, who is connecting from Berlin, and she's asking you, so how to avoid cherry-picking effect in performing clinical trials? So do you think that real-world data application can make clinical trials transparent? Who wants to take that question?
Javier.
Yeah, Javier, I can see
you.
Yeah,
I guess.
Javier, it's yours. It's your question. I can comment, but it's yours.
No, I will definitely also rely on your comment, Angel. But yeah, I mean, it obviously. The whole process of clinical trials can be definitely made more transparent, and the use of, or I would say rather, the use of real-world data is potentially not going to be the key issue here. When we think about this issue of the transparency of the trials altogether, the issue is not in whether we use or not use real-world data for example, for the recruitment. We need to think about the design of the trial, and we need to think about how we set it in motion, and how we in general, how we design and we set it on foot all together. And up from there, of course, the use of real-world data can be useful for that. Most likely when we start the collection from the patient side. So when we speak, for example, about patient-reported data, patient-reported outcomes in general, that is definitely a tool that can help us make the whole space more accessible and in general more transparent altogether. We don't need. I mean, we definitely need to take into account that we cannot forget the crucial issue of data security, and that definitely. I mean, that it's inevitable that at some point it collides with the grade of or the degree of transparency we want to implement in the trial itself. The key issue here is how secure we can deal with all that real-world data that we collect. This is key, and that's what we need to keep as a priority in mind.
Perfect. Okay. So I think we're coming to the end of the session. So I would like to ask you like a wrap-up question for everybody. So a bit, what has been happening those past weeks, I think there was some impact on clinical trials that will remain for the long term. So asking you a bit what you learned those past weeks, what still remain to improve, and my question would be like, can we expect clinical trials to be much shorter in the future because of what has been happening with COVID those past weeks? Grahaem, do you want to start?
Say I'm rather pessimistic. You're right to say that in the last 2 or 3 months, many rules have been, if not bent, at least amended to make things much easier. So, for example, I've been having a look at how it works in the UK, and one of the things that's happened is that the approval process for a clinical trial at an ethics committee has been speeded up dramatically. And the ethics committees are now expected to give a response within 36 hours for a COVID trial. Okay, and you've seen many things happen which would not normally happen, such as clinical trials being conducted with hydroxychloroquine just because President Trump happened to think that it worked. And in reality, there's practically no evidence it would work, and indeed it's probably harmful. So some of the shortcuts that have been taken have not actually necessarily been good. Some of them been good, some of them not. And remember that the healthcare system is a very risk-averse system. Entrepreneurs are used to taking risks. Healthcare systems are very averse to taking risks. So I suspect that when it gets back to a semblance of normal business, many of the rules and regulations will re-emerge not changed very much. That's my personal view.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Angel, do you want to give us your...
Yeah, I think I am very complimentary to Grahaem. I am very much optimistic, but that's, I think I agree 100% with what he has said. Okay, the first of all, I think one thing is being very positive. Right now, clinical trials are being known, so everyone knows what is a clinical trial, or at least the society thinks they know what it's all about. Correct? So I think that's number one. So at least we have made that injected into the overall population. That for me means a lot, because it means that society, we are giving the power back to the patient. And if the patient gets the power and he uses that with common sense, although the healthcare systems are very much risk adverse, as Grahaem is saying, they will have to be, or they will be pushed as they have been pushed. So I think it's on all of us, I think that we represent a little bit part of the ecosystem to ensure that this transformation that is being claimed by the society goes to the right end. And I think that's what I'm very optimistic, because there's one thing that we know that we need to do, that is use the power of the technology, use the fact that the people right now, they wanted to go and see a doctor. They are amazing scared. So the fact that they can be followed by a video conference, that the fact that they can have a gadget that can also know how they are being evolving in a treatment, I think this is making a difference. So right now, not everything needs to be done face to face. And we have educated both the medical side, but also society. So I am very, very positive about what technology have to bring today and tomorrow into the table. And we need to use the technology, the data, the artificial intelligence, and all the digital capabilities in the benefit of the society, the benefit of the patient. That's my view.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Angel. Javier from Iomed, closing words? What are your takeaways?
I would say I am closer to Angel's view here. I'm also rather optimistic here. And the reason, I have mainly two key reasons to be optimistic here. First of all, and it was already pointed towards here by Grahaem as well, I think that we have seen that we can, and I wouldn't use the word bend, but we can speed up certain processes hugely when it is in need of doing so. Those changes that have been propelled, of course, by an emergency can be kept in the future. We can definitely keep those processes for the future, those rather speedy processes. We can keep them for the future absolutely fine. And we should try to do so. It has also boosted, and this would be complementary to this first point, this emergency has boosted the capability of public institutions to collaborate with private companies and institutions. And this is also key for the whole ecosystem and environment to develop further in the future. And finally, during this emergency, we've seen a huge technology adoption, both by regulatory agencies as well as by hospitals, sponsors, CROs, in general, all the stakeholders in the system. We need to keep that path. And if we do so, there is definitely a lot of room of improvement and a lot of possibilities of improvement in the clinical trial sector that for some that have been born, let's say, in an emergency situation like the one we're living through nowadays. But we can definitely keep those lessons for the future and keep those tools for the future.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Javi. Xavier, last word for you.
Yeah, I mean, if I answer from my wish, I will be fully aligned with Javier and Angel. If I answer from my experience and feeling, I'm aligned close to Grahaem. We have a huge amount of lesson learned from this COVID half year. Let's talk half year from early start in China till now. We have figured out how we can improve the legal part, the budget, the health regulators authorization, but thereafter, when coming back to normality, the inertia of many of these partners is so strong. This time we have approved, as Grahaem pointed out, in health regulators in 24, 48 hours. Most of the phase 3 trials that had not direct data related to SARS-CoV-2. They did for MERS, for Ebola, for AIDS, but not for SARS-CoV-1 or 2. And we did approve because the urgency, the priority, the need of checking out some treatment that we didn't have anything, we're pushing to approve. Furthermore, if some strong country, powerful country president or prime minister is still pushing, so it's easier to get the authorization. But I'm convinced that even in some of the fields we will improve. We will speed up the trials. In such a way, we will be able to talk with sponsors, with CROs, with sites among these three partners in order to discriminate which criteria, which usual actions are really giving added value to the trial. But in other parts, and I'm afraid mainly in health regulators, in compliance, in security, I'm afraid that we will not go to a fast way in performing and carrying out trials in the coming years. It will take a couple of years to rely in the relationship, CROs, sponsors, sites, dealing with information. But regulators, as Grahaem pointed out, are reluctant to take risky decisions. And we will be still less fast than what we could go in the trials in the coming years.
Okay, Xavier, thank you very much. So I think we still have some positive takeaways to take out from those two packs and that should impact clinical trials in the future. Even if everything is not perfect, we still have things to change. So that's the end of the event. I would like to thank everybody. It was really, I think, a great session, very insightful, very great introduction on clinical trials, to the state of clinical trials, if technology can impact, but not to forget the human part that was mentioned a lot today. So we're actually planning on having another session on clinical trials, or maybe with sponsors in a couple of months, because at the moment they are very busy actually dealing with clinical trials. But in a few months, they can share with us what they've been living at the moment with COVID-19. So thanks everybody for coming. We'll be back next week, so next Wednesday, and we'll have a special session, international session, around COVID-19 and how it was managed internationally. So we'll have someone from Singapore, someone from Latin America, someone from United States, someone from UK, and someone from Africa. So I think it will be a very exciting session to see a bit how everybody managed the. So see you next Wednesday, 5 p.m. Thank you very much. Have a nice rest of the week.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.